Good morning. Thanks for having us here. My name's Connie Geyer, and I'm the founder of Marissa's Purpose. I started this charity in 2016 when my daughter passed away from a drug overdose. And since then, I've been trying to reach out to as many schools and students and parents and staff as I can, because it's really important to me that I try to educate as many people as I can. Marissa passed away from a cocaine fentanyl overdose, and when I found that out, I had no idea what fentanyl was. So I have been educating myself on fentanyl and other drugs that have been affecting our community. And along with me talking to students and staff, I've also been doing some research on different speakers around the country, and I have brought today a speaker for you, and her name is Nadine Machkovech, and she's a certified recovery coach. She's a person in long-term recovery, and as an educator on addiction and mental health, she looks to positively disrupt the current landscape for adolescents, especially young women across the country. She's dedicated to building a life centered around self-care, service, and reconnecting others to their greater purpose in life. It's through her unique style of storytelling that she leaves her audience feeling inspired and motivated, reminding them that they have the choice to utilize their power to help change the world and the world around them. She is also the Chief of Operations of Rise Together. It's a grassroots nonprofit organization that exists to ignite a youth-led movement that is saving lives every day. So I'd like to introduce Nadine to you. I've brought her here because I'm so passionate about this whole subject. So please give her the time to talk. Thank you.
Excuse me while I put this microphone on. All right, I think I got it on here. All right, good morning, everyone. Can we please give it up for Connie? Thank you. You know, I have to actually just take a moment before I get started to truly thank, of course, Connie and her family and those part of Marissa's Purpose, and even the individuals that are part of Piatt County Mental Health. The fact that they were able to bring me into this community is absolutely amazing. I'm super excited to be here. I was able to be in one of your local schools yesterday, and I did a local presentation last night. And for me, guys, like, this is something that I live for. Like, I don't know about you, like when you woke up this morning, you're probably like, oh man, I'm tired, I gotta go to school again. But for me, man, like I woke up super stoked because I love being here, one, and also I love being in front of middle school students because I think you guys are awesome, right? I think you're pretty great. What do you think? Yeah, some of you, you're like, all right. How are we doing this morning so far though? Are we doing good? Are you the sixth graders? Only the sixth graders are good this morning? How about everybody else? How are you doing over here? You all right? Okay, that was super lame. A little bit more? How are we doing this morning? Again, just the sixth graders. Well, I see that you're maybe not too excited, but I surely am. You see, guys, for me, if you were to ask me 5 years ago if I were to ever step in on a stage or in a gymnasium in front of hundreds of students, I probably would have laughed in your face. In fact, this was something that I never imagined doing. This was something that I never foresaw in my 5-year plan. But what I do know is that this conversation is important. Now, before I get in, I'm going to share a little bit about my story today, and I'm going to share a little bit about the things that I've been learning over the last few years, because I knew there was going to be a spot. For me, guys, over the last few years, I've been traveling across the Midwest and even across the nation, and I've been educating students such as yourselves around topics like addiction, but also around topics around mental health and suicide and bullying. Because the way that I see it today, guys, we could look at addiction as a whole, but addiction is more like the tip of the iceberg, right? Usually, like when you start using substances or drugs or alcohol, it's typically a point or a place where you use it to mask the pain. And over the last few years, what we've been finding after over traveling 300,000 miles and educating over 160,000 students such as yourself, we've been on a mission. We've been on a mission to not only exist and ignite a youth-led movement that is saving lives, but more so, we've been on a mission to educate you, to educate the youth, to educate, engage, and inspire you. We want to create communities where the youth, you guys, can feel loved, you can feel heard, and you can be inspired to live in hope. And now I know that that conversation is very general. But I hope that after today, after this presentation, and after I share a little bit about my story, I hope that this conversation encourages you. I hope that it encourages you to take a look at addiction and mental illness in maybe a different light. And what I mean by that is it wasn't too long ago, guys, that I was addicted to heroin. I was addicted to opioids, and I was using and abusing substances, and by the age of 17, I was ready to give up. I was at a place in my life where I was ready to give up hope because I didn't want to deal with it anymore. I didn't know how to deal with the daily life pressures and stressors that every single teenager has to deal with. But the difference is, guys, is today why I'm here or why I'm speaking out in the first place is because it got to this point where not only did I nearly lose my life, but my friends and family members were dying. Myself and my team, the work that we've been doing over the last few years is to speak out, to talk about these issues, to break the silence around topics like suicide and bullying and addiction and mental illness, because frankly, nobody was talking about it. Most of the time, these conversations are not being had. And so when we got started, it got to this point where we saw how many people were being affected by addiction and mental illness. In fact, today, 400 plus people die every single day in America to drugs and alcohol. Now just think about that for 1 second. 400 people die every single day. Now there's, what, 350 or so students in this room right now? Like imagine this whole room plus 50 more people being wiped out every single day in America. You think somebody would talk about it, right? You think that this conversation would be very prevalent and people would be talking about it more often, right? So we could say like 1 in 3 households are being affected by the addiction crisis. 1 in 3. So that's if I were to say 1, 2, 3, your house was affected, 1, 2, 3, your house, 1, 2, 3, your house, and so on and so forth, right? You get the point. It's serious. It's happening. And I'm actually going to show you exactly how much we know that it is happening. So before I dive into my story, I want to learn a little bit about yours. So I'm going to ask you a few questions. And I first want to thank you ahead of time for each and every one of you for showing the respect and sitting through this conversation. I'm sure as you were sitting in, you were like, oh man, now we got to go see another speaker. We got to learn more things about drugs and alcohol. I know that this maybe isn't your favorite thing to do, but I appreciate you showing up today. And I appreciate you showing up as your best self, because I am, and I'm doing this for you. But what I'm curious to know is how this conversation is being affected in your community. So one of the first questions that I want to know is, what did you all have for breakfast this morning? I mean, cereal? Some chocolate? Oh, hot chocolate. All right, so we all had breakfast this morning. That's good, that's good. That has nothing to do with this conversation, but I want to make sure you're listening. So I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to be very polite around the people that are going to be standing up during this question. But I want you to stand up if you know someone that's being affected by addiction in one way or another. And this could be someone that's addicted to drugs or alcohol or any other substances. Okay. Now, I'm curious to know, so all of you standing up right now know someone that's being affected by the addiction crisis, right? So when we talk about 1 in 3 households, this is definitely a third of the room. Now, I'm curious to know how many of you know someone that's being affected by a mental illness? And that could be something along the lines of anxiety. Do they suffer from anxiety or depression, maybe suicidal thoughts? Or maybe it goes, and so you can stay standing, so keep standing. And maybe it's maybe someone who is suffering from bullying or suicidal tendencies, maybe self-harm. All right. Yeah, so the majority of you, right? So I want you to just take this moment and I want you to look around the room for a second. I want you to take a look at your friends and your peers, the people you go to school with, the people you see on a daily basis, that you walk the halls with. And I want you to understand just how much each and every one of us are being affected by this conversation. Take a seat. I appreciate you standing up. And I want you to know that I'm standing up with you. Because when we talk about 1 in 3 households being affected by the addiction crisis, my home was one of them. But you see, it wasn't something that I ever expected. It wasn't something that I ever wanted to happen. And the difference, guys, you know, when I come in here and I'm about to go and share a little bit of my story, but what I want you to understand is I'm not telling you what to do. I'm not coming in here and I'm not sharing a bunch of statistics and I'm not talking about, you know, all the things that you should or should not do or what you're supposed to say no to. I know that even if you smoke a joint or maybe drink a beer or whatever you do, that doesn't mean you're going to become addicted. But what I want you to understand, and as I walk through my story, the progression, kind of where it started for me, because it started from an innocent place. It started from a place of me not really understanding what could potentially happen. But I know that no matter what I say today, it might not make a bit of difference what you go and do Friday and Saturday night. I don't make that choice for you. You make that choice for you. But I hope that if anything, this conversation will help you understand a little bit more and take it from a young woman's perspective. Because for me, guys, it wasn't that long ago that I was sitting in the exact same seats that you were. In fact, for me, it was just a few years ago that at the age of 17 years old, like I was saying before, I was ready to give up. That it was only just a few years ago that instead of preparing for any sort of speech, instead, I was preparing for the end. I was preparing for the end of my life because at the age of 17, becoming addicted to opioids and prescription pills, I was ready to end my life. I wanted to give up. I wanted to give up because I didn't know how to deal anymore at that point. I didn't know how to deal, like I was saying, with the daily life pressures and stressors that teenagers has to deal with. And it was really hard. In fact, it was so hard, guys, that it was something, though, that just didn't happen overnight. It wasn't something that all of a sudden I woke up one morning and said, oh, today's the day. It didn't just happen overnight that I became addicted to drugs and alcohol. It wasn't something that just happened. It was a progression. And for me, guys, for me, it all started with a secret. The secret that I had was something that I held on to for so long. But the secret that I had wasn't about my addiction. It wasn't about the use of drugs and alcohol. It wasn't about wanting to commit suicide. My secret went so much deeper than that. My secret for me was that I never felt good enough. Now, how many of you here have maybe not felt good enough before? Raise your hand. Yeah. For me, it still happens often. And maybe for you, it's something just a little bit different. Maybe it's not about feeling good enough, but maybe for you, it's not feeling smart enough, or pretty enough, or strong enough, or smart enough, or maybe just enough in anything that you do. Because that's how I felt. That's how I felt stemming back long before I could even remember, going back to when I was 5 years old and I watched my parents get divorced. Now, I don't know if any of you here have parents that are divorced or if you live in separated homes, but for me as a young girl, I didn't understand why that happened. I didn't understand why my parents didn't want to be together anymore or why they didn't love each other anymore. It didn't make any sense to me. It made me question, well, what am I doing wrong? Was I not being a good enough daughter to them for them to stay together? It didn't make any sense to me. And so when I watched my parents get divorced, I watched them start to struggle with their own addictions and struggle with their own issues that they were going through. And for me, guys, I took a look at myself. Well, what was I doing wrong? I didn't understand why they didn't love each other anymore, why they didn't want to be together anymore. I didn't understand why I could only go stay at my dad's house every other weekend. But for me, while it didn't maybe make sense for me, it definitely did for my older sister. You see, my oldest sister is 10 years older than me, and she understood the conversation. She understood what was going on at home and the choices that my parents were making, and it started to affect her really badly. So much so that I watched her start to make really bad choices as she started to use and abuse substances. She started getting into trouble with the law. She started running away. She was sleeping around. All the things that she was doing were really bad. And so yet again, I started to question, well, what was I doing wrong as a little sister? Was I not being a good enough sister to her for her to come home? It didn't make any sense to me. I didn't really understand why these things were happening. I didn't really understand why these things were going on at home. Now, I don't know, this conversation around addiction and mental illness is something that I know was starting to happen in my home, but yet nobody was talking about it. I didn't really understand it. But I can see here, like this conversation that I'm having today, I know that you guys get it. I know that you get it because I can see by the amount of people that stood up. I know that you're being affected by addiction and mental illness, and I know that this conversation is very real to you, and it was to me too. But the difference is my family wasn't talking about it. Not only were we not talking about it at home, but we definitely weren't talking about it at school. But at the end of the day, guys, like all I wanted was to be seen and to be heard. I just wanted my parents to show up for me. But they focused so much of their attention on my older sister that I was kind of left on the back burner. And because of this happening, I was just like yearning and like searching for this deeper connection. I just wanted to feel like my parents loved me. Something I know that each and every one of us want, right? We want to feel like we're loved and that we're being seen for who we are. But that wasn't happening for me at home. And so as I grew up, by the time I got to middle school, the thoughts and feelings around not feeling good enough became even worse. In fact, it became even like way worse that it got to the point that this connection and love and affection that I was searching for, I started looking in all the wrong places. I started worrying about things that really didn't matter. I started placing like my own self-worth and value on all of these other outside things that didn't matter. Like what I looked like, what type of clothes I was wearing, whether they were name brand or not. I started worrying about what kind of shoes I had on. I started worrying about what my hair looked like. I started wearing makeup at too young of an age, and I worried about what others thought of me, especially other boys, because I thought that maybe they were going to make me feel good enough. I thought that maybe all of these other things in my life were going to make me feel like I was good enough, and so that's what I worried about. I focused so much of my attention on that. But I never talked about it. When I showed up at school, I was so worried about what other people thought of me that when I went to school, I wasn't about to talk about the things that were going on at home. When I showed up, I wasn't about to talk about the things that were going on with my parents or that were going on with my oldest sister. I didn't want to talk about it, mostly because I was embarrassed. I was ashamed. What would people think of me? What would people say? So I would go to school every day and pretend like everything was just fine. I would go to school every day and I would put this fake mask on my face and pretend to be somebody that I wasn't because it was easier that way. I would go to school and I would put a fake smile on and I would pretend like everything was just fine because it was easier that way, you see? Because when I went to school, I didn't think that anybody else would care. Why would anybody else care about what was going on in my life? I had to figure that out. At least that's what I thought. I didn't think that anybody else would know or would really understand what I was going through, and I get it. We all have our own lives. We all have our own things that we're doing on a day-to-day basis. And especially in middle school, it's really hard. All the things that you're learning about yourself as you're going through puberty and you're learning about who you are and things that you care about, things that you enjoy, you're learning who your friends are. These were all things that I was focused on. But yet at the end of the day, guys, when I went home, I felt lonelier than I did before. So I continued to stay silent. I continued to suffer from my secrets that I continued to keep, and I started to bury them so deep because I didn't want to talk about it. I didn't want to, and I didn't know how. I didn't know how to have this kind of conversation when I showed up. How do you really go to your friends or to your teachers and talk about your thoughts, feelings, and emotions? That's not something we do, right? Or we definitely don't ask for help, right? I know I didn't, because I was like, well, I got this. I'm fine. And that's exactly how I felt for a long time. And so much so, especially through my middle school years, by the time I got to high school, guys, things didn't get any easier. In fact, where are my 8th graders at? Are you over here? Are you ready for high school? Maybe, a little bit. It's kind of scary, right? What was that? You want to go back to 1st grade? Where it's easy, right? Yeah. You know, I know that, man, 1st grade is so awesome, right? When you're younger, you get to just like be who you want, you get to say what you want, you get to just have a good time, you get to hang out, you get to show up for recess, and you just get to like be you, right? And that's before all the judgment kicks in. It's before all of the worries that we have around the society that we live in, right? Because for me, guys, when I went to school, I always looked at myself and my family because I was like, man, like, I feel like we're so different than everybody else. I felt like my family was so different because I had parents that were divorced, and I was always so worried about like what everybody else was doing, what everybody else's family was doing. Like, why did they get to live in the nice house, and why did they get to drive the nice cars, or why did they get to have the nice clothes? Why did they get the new game console or the new Xbox or the new video games? Like, why did they get those things and I don't? Like, why was my family so different? And those are the thoughts and questions that I know you guys are having. And there's nothing wrong with that. But the difference is like by me sharing this, I hope that after today or after this presentation, it encourages you to look at this just a little bit differently. To really take a look at how you view yourself and how you view the people around you and how you're showing up for each other. How are you having a conversation around this? Because for me, guys, by the time I got to high school, it didn't get any easier. Now, I'm not trying to like freak you out at all, but for me, by the time I got to high school, all of these thoughts, feelings, and emotions around like feeling good enough and finding who I was became even more difficult. And it became more difficult because by the time it was my freshman year and I got asked to go to my very first party, I didn't have the courage to say no. Because just saying no isn't just that easy. I knew the warning signs. I knew the things that maybe I shouldn't have been doing. But I didn't understand how it was truly going to affect me. I didn't know that by me going to that party that night and by starting to use and abuse substances, whether we want to talk about gateway drugs or not, sure, I started drinking and I started smoking marijuana, but I had no idea it was going to lead me to a heroin addiction. I had no idea that by me just simply experimenting with substances, I had no idea what path it was going to take me down. Because for me, guys, after that, it's like the party never stopped. So as I continued to use and abuse substances, and I started digging myself so deep into a hole that I thought I would never make it out. Because as I continued to use, I continued to feel worse about myself. Sure, maybe it was fun and exciting in the beginning, but things got out of control really fast. But like I was saying, it's not something that I ever expected. Because here I was sitting in the exact same seats you were sitting back. Well, that's not going to be me. That won't ever happen to me. I got this under control. I'm just fine. But when I talk about being the age of 17 and wanting to commit suicide because I was so sick and tired of being sick and tired, it was true. In fact, for me, guys, it got to the point where I was so ashamed that I couldn't even look myself in the mirror anymore because of the choices that I was making. But the difference is that I thought I had it under control. I thought that I was doing everything right, because the difference for me, guys, is I did show up to school every day. I got good grades. I had a car. I had my own license. I had a job. I thought I was doing everything right. I even graduated high school early with high honors, but yet here I was silently suffering to the disease of addiction, and I didn't know how to talk about it. I didn't know how to talk about it, and I didn't know who I could even ask for help. Because I didn't think that anybody else cared, man. I didn't think that anybody else would really understand what I was going through at that point. And so as I continued to suffer and as I continued to stay silent around this topic, it was just so much easier that way, guys. But the difference was after high school, I wasn't going anywhere. Like all of these dreams, goals, and aspirations that you have right now that you can't wait to grow up and do and accomplish, whether it's going on to college or maybe one day having your own family, or maybe it's traveling the world, or maybe you're going to do art or play music, like whatever you want to do, I wanted that too. But it was so hard because at that point for me, guys, I wasn't going anywhere. Like all of these dreams, goals, and aspirations, things that I wanted to do and accomplish after high school wasn't happening. Because as I continued to use, I continued to get even worse. So much so that it got to this point where I didn't know how to deal with it anymore. I didn't want to deal with it anymore. I didn't want to deal with the struggles that I was facing. I was ready to be done with it, guys. I was so ashamed. I was so broken. I was so afraid. I didn't think there was going to be anything more. And I get it. I know that you guys understand it too. I know that you understand it because I could ask you right now, by a show of hands, how many of you here think that drugs and alcohol are a problem in your community? Raise your hand. Yeah, most of you, right? So if you think that drugs and alcohol are a problem in your community, how many of you think drugs and alcohol are a problem right here in this school? Raise your hand. Yeah, most of you, right? So you know exactly what I'm talking about. You know exactly the conversation that I'm having here today. Because I knew what was going on. I knew the things and the choices that my friends were making. I knew what was going on at school and within my community. But the difference was, guys, is that we never talked about it. I grew up from a real small, rural town just like this here. And we had the same things going on in our community, and it's no different than the communities that I travel to all across the nation. I can see the similar conversation that's being had. I know how much you guys are being impacted, but the difference is what are you gonna do about it after today? Are you gonna continue to just sit back and allow these things to happen to you and your family or in your community or right here in your school? Or are you gonna do something different? Because I wish I would have had that opportunity, but I didn't. I didn't because I didn't have the education and awareness that you're receiving today. I didn't understand that there were other people out there who struggled and who overcame their struggles. I didn't think that was ever gonna be possible for me. I didn't think it was ever gonna be possible until I finally, in some of my deepest, darkest days after high school, when I was ready to give up, that I had someone finally reach out to me. In fact, it was in some of the deepest and worst parts of my using and active addiction that I finally had someone reach out to me, something so simple that each and every one of you could do here today. But the difference was when she reached out to me that day, finally, she offered me some support. She reached out and she said something so simple. She said, "Nadine, what can I do to help you?" She said, I can see that you're struggling. I can see that you're going through a hard time. And she said, "I love you and I care about you. I am here for you." Something so simple. Man, it was exactly what I needed to hear, because finally I just wanted somebody to see me for who I was, not for the mistakes that I was making. And she showed up for me and she met me in my mess. And the thing is, guys, is that she didn't shame me. She didn't force me to change. She didn't make me sound like I was a bad person. She didn't make me feel like I was a bad person, because I already felt bad enough. But instead, she offered me a different way. She offered me some support. She said, "Nadine, let me walk this journey with you. Let me help you find a different way to live." Because at first, guys, I didn't think it was going to be possible. I didn't think that getting clean and sober or living a life in recovery was ever going to be possible. One, because I didn't even know what that meant. I didn't think that living a life in sobriety or being sober was even going to be possible, because here's the kicker, guys. I was only 20 years old at the time. I was 20 years old. Before I could even legally step foot in a bar, my sister said, "Nadine, you have to get sober." I was like, no way. I'm not even 21 yet. I'm at least going to drink, or I'm at least going to smoke weed, because I didn't think that being completely clean and sober was ever even possible. I mean, I grew up in the state of Wisconsin. If any of you know Wisconsin, we're known for our drinking. I mean, we have a baseball team named the Brewers. We have a bar on every corner and two in between. Like, that's something I grew up with. That's something that we were proud of. And so for me, I was like, oh man, I don't think this is going to be possible. I truly didn't. I didn't think that it was going to be possible for me. And it wasn't until I had a significant loss in my life at that point that everything started to shift for me just a little bit. Because at this point, when my sister reached out to me and she offered me a place to live, and she offered me a place to get clean and sober, and so I moved in with her, guys. But after that was when everything changed. Because it was 2 weeks after moving in with her, after moving out of my hometown, after going through detox, that I lost one of my best friends to a heroin overdose. And it was at that time that everything changed for me. It was then, when my best friend Justin passed away, that I started to question everything. I started to question everything because I didn't understand why he died and I didn't. It didn't make any sense to me because, guys, it was 2 weeks before that I was doing the same drugs that he was. I was doing the exact same dope that he was, that it could have and it should have been me. After all the choices that I made, all the mistakes that I made, all the things that I went through, I didn't understand why he died and I didn't. And I don't know if you've ever lost someone in your life, but it's hard, right? But I had so many questions. I had so many things that I was wondering, like, well, why am I still here then? What does this mean for Nadine? And it was at that time, guys, that I decided to do something different. It was at that time that I started to wonder, well, maybe I am still here for a reason. And I had no idea what that was yet, but I was going to find out. I was going to find out because there was no way I was going to put my family through what I watched his family go through. And so when I talk about this conversation being really real, so much so that it didn't stop there. I lost my best friend Justin, and then I lost my brother-in-law a couple years ago, and my cousin at 24 years old passed away just in February to an overdose, to a fentanyl overdose, because a pill that he took was laced with fentanyl and he had no idea. And so at that time, guys, when I lost my best friend, that's when I decided to speak out for the first time. That's when I decided that I had to share my story in hopes that it can help you maybe see this just a little bit differently. It was when I was given this opportunity and a platform to stand up and share my story for the very first time in front of 800 freshman students. Some of the most judgmental people you can ever be in front of. And it was so hard. It was so hard. Like, when I talk about this not being something that I ever planned or expected to do, it was so hard to stand up there. But guys, after that day, after I stepped off stage for the very first time, I knew exactly why I was put here on earth. That's when I knew why I was meant to do this work, so I can help you understand that you're not alone in the struggles that you're facing. That whatever you're going through, whatever struggles you're going through, it's a big deal and it matters. It matters because you matter. And that's something that I didn't believe for a really long time. In fact, there's still some days that I wake up and it's still hard to believe. But over the last 5 years, guys, I've worked really, really hard on my recovery. I've worked really hard in understanding what this means to me, why I continue to speak out, and it's in hopes that I can stand up here as I bare my soul, that even just one of you, just one, comes up here and shakes my hand and maybe makes me feel not so alone. That after this presentation, I hope that we'll be able to create a space for you to come up here and share your story with me, because your story matters. Each and every one of you here matters, and that's something I didn't think for a long time, guys, because for me, over the last few years, I finally am able to believe in myself. For me, I finally, like when I wake up in the morning, I don't have to put a fake mask on my face anymore. I don't have to put a fake smile on my face because I'm proud of the person that I am today. Because I'm okay when I look at myself in the mirror today, I'm okay with the person that I'm looking back at. But that's because I no longer let my past define me. For me, guys, I don't stand up here and say, hi, my name is Nadine and I'm some drug addict. Instead, today I'm a person in long-term recovery, and what that means to me, guys, is I'm able to show up. I'm able to show up as my best self, and I'm able to be a good sister and a good daughter and a good friend and hopefully a good speaker. Because I do this for you. Maybe not for each and all of you. I'm sure some of you will walk away today not thinking twice about this conversation. But if just one of you can see this conversation in a different light, that recovery is possible, that recovery comes in so many different forms, guys. That you don't have to get to a point of using and abusing substances, that if you're using today, let's talk about it. Let's find you some support. Let's get you the encouragement that you need, and I will walk that journey with you. Because it doesn't have to be that way. I want you to understand that you guys too were put here in this room today for a specific reason, that each and every one of you here was put here on this earth for a specific reason. And I hope that this conversation encourages you to take a look at that. Find things that bring joy and happiness into your own heart. Find healthy ways to take care of yourself and take care of your friends. Because if you know someone, I saw all of you raise your hands. If you know someone, reach out today. Talk to somebody about it. Do something different that you haven't done before. Start showing up as a leader in your community instead of a follower. Stop trying to be like everybody else. Be you. Be who you were made to be. Because you guys, you're enough. You're exactly enough the way that you are. You don't have to be like anybody else. And I know that this conversation, you may think that maybe it doesn't obtain to you, or maybe today you're not struggling. But I hope that if anything, if you know somebody here that is struggling, that you do something about it. That you talk about it. Because when I talk about addiction being the tip of the iceberg, it's all of those other things beneath the surface that we need to talk about. Those warning signs, when you see that your friends are maybe using, or you see that maybe somebody is struggling, that you start talking about it today. That you don't wait till tomorrow. Because if anything, guys, the difference is that you're not defined by your past. You're not defined by the choices that you made yesterday. You're defined by the path you decide to take right now. And for me, guys, the difference is that even though I've made many, many mistakes in my life, today I no longer believe that I am one. And that's the difference. The difference for me is that I'm able to show up today. I'm able to show up as me. But the difference is I don't go home with you after this. I don't walk these halls with you. I've never walked in your shoes. I don't know what it's like to be you. Only you know that. But if anything, after today, I hope that you can find the courage to take a step in the right direction, that you have the courage to stand up and speak out around these topics that you care about. And maybe it's not around addiction and mental health. Whatever matters to you, talk about it. Reach out about it, speak out about it, and do something different that you've never done before. Because at the end of the day, guys, the only person who can start making those changes, the only person who can truly start showing up for you and start choosing the path that you want to take is going to be you. You have that choice and you have that power. And that's exactly what I heard your principals say on the announcements today. You get to decide what kind of day you're going to have, right? And so I hope that if anything, when you walk away from this presentation, you can stand up and do something different that cares and that matters to you, because really, guys, that choice is going to be yours. Thank you.